things that we see. Let's have all of them up together. So the way we go is, let's look at the government policy, let's look at what the private sector adjustment was, and what's the outcome. We have in place a culture where we do not value excellence. And this is true even within the government service for members of the same ethnic group. It's not what you know, but who you know, or who you related to. So given this chronism in promotion, we see great brain drain from Malaysia in all communities. It's not some disloyal sub-ethnic group that are running away. Even people who are supposedly failed are running away. When I present this, I've often been confronted by people who tell me that most people leave is because they are greedy bastards, because given the fact the pay is so high outside, why should they stay? It's true. But because of the external pull, do we need to have an internal push so that whoever is slow in moving should be pushed up? Given that pull is always there, we don't need to supplement it with a push. Then the other thing is, we all know this, is that the 30% requirement that stocks be sold to government-approved investors when a small, medium company wants to grow. When a firm grows, one way of raising funds is to go be listed on the public stock, on the stock market. But we have this policy that you have to hand over 30% to the government strengths of the government. And the result is many firms would either choose not to grow because they don't hand over 30%, or they do what Shangri-La has done, move to Hong Kong and list yourself there. That's capital flight. And what is the extent of capital flight in Malaysia? If you add up all the illegal capital flight across countries, from 2001 to 2010, China is number 1, Malaysia is number 2, and Mexico is number 3. Let's just take 2010. In 2010 alone, $600 billion went out of China, 63 billion ran out from Malaysia, 663, and 54 ran out from Mexico. But we know that there's great differences in the size of the countries. Let's do it on money running out per person. In the case of China, it's $300 that ran out in 2010. Mexico, $400 that ran out. In Malaysia, 2,275. Malaysia boleh lari lah. So that's why we have a shortage of investment. The capital is running out. Skilled manpower is leaving, capital is leaving, and there are two other factors that are less mentioned, but I think are highly important. In other words, fixing the first two is not enough. You've got to fix the last two. The third one in particular explains the highly unequal geographical distribution of economic development in Malaysia. To tell you how centralized Malaysia is, perhaps you live in the Klang Valley do not know, every bus line in Penang, every bus route is determined in Putrajaya. Every bus stop on the bus route is determined in Putrajaya. That's been true for the last, since 1970. And that is even before Google Earth came to existence, where the guy could Google Earth it and see where to put the bus stops. These were a very centralized country. Centralized to the degree that if you add up the total expenditure of the government, the federal government takes 94% of the expenditure, is responsible for 94%. The 13 states is 6% of total government expenditure. What is the consequence of the local government not having fiscal power, financial power? You cannot supply infrastructure to support the growth of local industries. For example, how would one expand Penang Airport? Penang Airport now cannot take long-distance flights, cannot take flights from in around the 1980s or the 1990s, when the 747 first came out, there are chartered flights from Scandinavia that comes to Penang during the winter months. They come, but then the plane flies empty to Kuala Lumpur, and the previous group of passengers get on the plane in Kuala Lumpur and fly back. Why? It is because by the time the plane comes from Copenhagen, it has burned up all its fuel, so it could land. But when to fly to Copenhagen, you completely fill up, it's much heavier, it cannot take off on the Penang runway. It's 400 meters too short. So that's why they have to fly to Kuala Lumpur, and the passengers all move on to Kuala Lumpur, two for the price of one. They see two times. So so what happens? What has happened? It's an inconvenience. They stop coming here to Penang. We have no more chartered flights of middle-class tourists. They all go to Phuket, because by the time Phuket now has that runway. So for the last 20 years, Penang has been asking the federal government, please extend this 400 meters of runway so that we could become the exotic winter retreat of the northern hemisphere. The federal government said, we have no money, fair enough. But then meanwhile, it has built two runways that are longer, one in the new KLIA, and the second in Langkawi. The only trouble is that tourists seems to prefer not to go there. So no planes from Copenhagen has landed in Langkawi yet. It's just that just because you build doesn't mean that they will come. You could have something there for them to come to. And that was what's wrong with Langkawi. Langkawi just didn't have enough of the goodies to attract them to come. So the government have enough money, so this government says, okay, we will build it ourselves. We haven't got any reply yet for the last 5 years. Maybe after May 5th, good news may come. But the important thing is, how would it have been done in New York City if they had to expand Kennedy Airport? The New York City government will establish an airport authority, borrow the money on the commercial market, expand the runway, and then collect fees to service the debt. This is normal. You borrow money, build infrastructure, and then service it with user fees. That was allowed in Malaysia in 1957, because Malaysia was a compact among the states. All the states had the right to do that. But over time, the government got more centralized. We took away that right of states to borrow. So no states can borrow money to supply infrastructure to support industrial growth. So there's a lot of production bottlenecks outside the Klang Valley. That's why no industries are located there. To show you how decentralized we are, University Science Malaysia has a bigger budget than the Penang state government. How does no state in any American, there's no American state that would have a university budget bigger than the budget of the state government? How did this so this centralized part extends in every facet of life. So for example, a lot of the services that were supplied by what that used to be called the city councils, like buses in Penang, up until 1965, were supplied by the city council. But that was abolished. The city council elections were removed, and everything went to federal. So because of this over-centralization, we have a highly unequal geographical distribution of development. Let me say how important it is to be decentralized. Ask ourselves, when did Malaysia first begin to industrialize seriously? It began to industrialize seriously only after 1970. Why? Because in 1969, Penang elected Karakan, which was an opposition state, and Lim Chong-yu knew that his political longevity depended on being able to restore growth to Penang. So he needed investments in the state to create jobs. But he knew that Tan Siew Sin, the only thing that Tan Siew Sin would give him would be the finger. He cannot count on more funds. So what did he do? He did what was against the intellectual, the conventional intellectual wisdom of that time. When I first went to college, the big thing was we have achieved political independence. Now we got to have economic independence. We want to get rid of neo-colonialism. What is neo-colonialism? We don't want foreign ownership in our state, in our country. We close ourselves to FDI. Lim Jong-il welcomed the foreigners, largely because he had no one else to ask. No one else, he couldn't get any money from the central government, and he wasn't going to able to get any special government state-linked corporations to invest in Penang, so he welcomed the foreigners. And that was lucky because most of Asia at that time was still very anti-FDI, except for Singapore, which was pushed out in '63. So, no, '65. That's '65. So anyway, so being the first group that opened itself to FDI, the FDI came, and every Menteri Besar who saw the industrialization of Penang said, hey, hosting people, that's my specialty. That's what politicians specialize in. So they all roll out the red carpet for FDI, and Malaysia industrialized on the basis of FDI. Notice this is very different from the way the Koreans, the Taiwanese, and the Japanese. All these three countries industrialized without FDI. Why? Because their capital and skilled labor stay at home. Whereas in Malaysia, they have ran away and they got replacements from FDI. So, I jump ahead of myself. The last thing is we got to think of seriously is to make the government more transparent, more accountable. What the biggest expenditure item of the state is development projects. And most of the development projects are negotiated, are given out on a negotiated basis. So there's no public monitoring is possible. And because no public monitoring is possible, the management of the projects are not accountable. And when people are not accountable, it's quite natural that performance has been lackadaisical, not particularly impressive. So that's why we have government service that don't work very well. Now, the next one, please. This is just a repeat of what I said, which is many of these policies were in existence since 1970. But yet, growth rate was 8.5% before 1996. How was that high growth possible? In other words, when you tell someone capital is running out, human talent is running out, and the country is growing at 8.5%, someone must be thinking, must be manna from heaven. How is it possible? It's possible because we opened ourselves to FDI. So domestic capital runs out, good riddance to disloyal capital. Domestic brain power runs out, good riddance to disloyal skilled labor, and we get foreign investment and foreign engineers. And at that time, we were also very lucky because we found oil off Terengganu. And with this huge amount of oil, we could undertake massive infrastructure investment here in the Klang Valley, not elsewhere. And the government would have financed Pavaja, Proton Saga, and all kinds of large projects. But what happened was all of this changed because the world changed. The change in the world allowed the negative impact of the government policies to show. All of this change, the process first began on January 1st, 1990, when Poland left the Iron Curtain. That began the disintegration of the Soviet Union. And more importantly, because what does that process lead to? More important, because if you look at the number of people producing for the world market, before 1990, half of the world's labor force are integrated into the global production system. The other half is either behind the Iron Curtain or in China, or in India. India chose to insulate itself from the rest of the world. But over time, this country is integrated into the International Division of Labour. And the big turning point in Malaysia was May 2000, when China joined WTO. Because what that meant was, it used to be a certain amount of FDI would go to China, but before China became member of WTO, it had no guaranteed access to the US market. Every year, US Congress has to pass the most favored nation status for China. So US Congress should shut off the Chinese growth engine anytime without violating international rules. So China had to join WTO. Until China joined WTO, if you put 2 textile mills in China, you'll put 1 in Southeast Asia. Because just in case you cannot ship from China, you can ship from Southeast Asia. So the moment China joined WTO, its access to Western European and North American markets is secure, there's no need for FDI to come here to diversify risk. So that's when Malaysia's FDI collapsed. That's when our investment rate collapsed. Private investment collapsed a bit because a lot of private investments had occurred in order to service the FDI that comes in. So since the FDI is not coming in, that also collapsed. So that's why the investment rate has fell by half, fell by 50%. And the government by that time had, after 20 years of mismanagement of the real estate enterprises, they don't have the money to undertake gigantic investment anymore. And I think the reason why we had 6.4% growth in the last quarter was because all the GLCs have pulled up their last resources, or rather borrow at 0 interest rate on the world market and make a big plunge of investment. That's kicked up the growth rate in Malaysia. So